Greetings. Back with another series on how to plan in chess. Today's game, we're going to be going over rating level, maybe 1,000, just to kind of speak to some of the ideas that players in this rating range see and the missed opportunities that they might have in planning. So let's take a look. We're going to be looking at this game from the black perspective. So right away, we remember that the objective of most openings in the beginning of the game is to control these four center squares. So pay attention to the activity in the center of the board. This is something that should help you determine how you develop your pieces and how you come up with a plan. Black played e5, which is basically an equalizing type move. Both players are attacking the center and also declaring that they're going to castle king side because they're developing pieces on the king side of the board as opposed to pieces on the queen side of the board. Okay, we continue. White naturally attacks the pawn in the center of the board. Black does the same. Both players are equally close to getting their king safe. White prematurely captures the pawn, in my opinion. He should be focusing on getting his king safe and not grabbing pawns. That is a priority. And in my estimation, Black correctly ignored the capture and continued to get his pieces developed. Now, in this instance, White develops his knight. He could have played d4. He could have developed his bishop, but instead he chose to make a knight move. That's not necessarily the most optimal move. In my estimation, Black castling is perfect. His king is safe. He's ready to begin attacking. And now White charges in the center. And we talked about this at the beginning of the game. Controlling the center is an objective for most openings. So right now, it would appear that White has a tremendous amount of development in the center. However, his king is still in the center. So Black should be able to make natural moves to be able to muster up an attack and combat this control in the center. Let's see what he does. He correctly pins the knight to the king, which immediately makes one of White's pawns in the center vulnerable. White breaks that pin. I would probably suggest just simply capturing this knight. He doesn't. He charges in the center with a pawn, which basically gives away a second pawn. So in this position, in my estimation, the correct move was probably simply just capture the knight. If you capture, White is probably going to capture, and then Black can simply play knight takes pawn with pressure on the newly developed bishop, and then he could do something like d6 and, develop the bishop to g4, which will probably be pinning the knight to the queen once this knight gets out of the way. That's a typical plan in this position, but okay, he didn't do that. He pushed this pawn in the center, which is already under attack by two pieces, and White correctly just simply grabs that piece off the board. So now, in this position, Black is now down two pawns. However, what he has done is opened up an attacking lane against the uncastled king. So arguably, you could say, yes, Black is down two pawns, but it's White's king that's in more trouble. There's no attack on Black's king in this position. We continue. He begins his attack by putting his rook on open files. And for those who might not know that, rooks belong on open files. And open file is defined by a file that has no pawns on it. No pawns from either side. So that's exactly what this is here. And that's where rooks belong. All right, we continue. There's a tickle on the bishop. Simply capturing the knight is probably the best idea. How do you know how to castle or when to castle? This is one of those opportunities for us to discuss planning. And the way that we know if we should be capturing here is we look at the squares where the bishop can go to. The bishop can't go here. Going here would be suspicious because there's no real attack other than putting pressure on that knight. Putting the bishop here would be dubious. Putting the bishop here would be suspicious. I'm not going to say dubious, but, some advanced player might try this. Going back this direction with the bishop is not helping. and then obviously giving the bishop away would be suspicious. So by my estimation, the choices that this bishop has are all retreating moves unless he captures on one of these two squares. And the only capture that makes sense is capturing the knight. So since this bishop's prospects are basically limited with the only best choice of capturing the other knight, he might as well just go ahead and capture a knight now and save himself time, because it would take 2 moves to capture the second knight. Just get rid of the knight, capture. White is probably going to simply capture, and then now black can play knight takes pawn and get one of his pawns back and still have pressure to threaten to win a piece. So this would have been one of those examples of when to take and when not to take. So missing an opportunity here, but we continue. He didn't do it. He retreated his bishop back, allowing white to do whatever he wants. In this case, breaking the pressure on his knight. So the king can also move and the knight can get out of the way without any harm. So that's another reason why capturing this knight would have made more sense, because it prevents white from doing what they want to. They can't just ignore a capture. So in this instance, black ends up moving the piece again, threatening a pawn, which is not the objective of the game. The objective of the game is to attack the king. Now, we do know the person who controls the center controls the direction of attack, but these pawns aren't that important in the middle of the board. Some might argue, coach, but if he captures this pawn, his knight will be under attack. But yes, the knight has a simple move of retreating and protecting this pawn. Let's find out what happened. Instead, the player, protected the pawn with the bishop, which is suspicious. But he could have simply just retreated here, protected this pawn without any problem. If white develops, he can just simply castle. We can afford to give some material back. Everything is totally fine here. But that's not how the game continued. So we look at it. White plays bishop e3, protecting the pawn twice. And there's a lot of pieces on the e file, incidentally. So to me, as a more advanced player, this is something that acts as a trigger. I look at this and I say, wait a minute, all of these pieces lined up on the e file and his king as a bonus, there's got to be something here brewing. The opportunity to attack definitely exists. So let's see what he does. He comes back and pins the knight again. I think that's totally fine, except for B4 is probably going to thwart this back and forth stuff. Here, white suggests that he's castling queenside. I would be snapping this pawn off right away. Let's see if he does it. He does not. So he misses the opportunity for a tactic. Grabbing this pawn because the knight can't capture without losing the queen. And even if knight takes pawn and then this pawn push happens, you can still grab material, whichever you want first, because pawn takes bishop puts a second pawn on the a file, which is basically a lost pawn, and you resume your attack in the center of the board. So he missed this opportunity and now decides to take the knight, which he could have taken several moves ago. So we're kind of going in circles. You can tell that there's a lack of understanding of what should be happening here. We've kind of repeated the position, and now white is grabbing with a tempo. Does not grab the pawn, though. Strangely enough, he misses the free pawn and simply goes for the I'm going to make your queen move idea. This move is not a good move. It absolutely does nothing other than make the queen move, which the queen wanted to move anyway, and black is still down 2 pawns. If you're going to move the knight into the center, you might as well grab some material. Hello? Grab the material and fork the player. All right, so he doesn't do that. He attacks. Now white gets his simple counterattack on the knight. He finally captures the pawn, but he puts the pieces in a piece relationship, and we'll talk about this in some other videos. You should be able to find them in our playlist, the ideas surrounding piece relationships, but this is the beginning of a piece relationship where the following pieces are in a relationship. The queen, the knight, and the rook are all entangled, if you will. So white adds pressure on the pin piece. Okay, anytime that you have a pin piece, you want to try to build up the pressure and not capture the piece right away. So Black defends the piece and sets up his own pin. And here, interesting enough, there is a weakness created from white. So one of the things that I want to address right away before we get into the simple fact that this bishop is under attack is the obvious moment where we realize that white has not castled. White has not castled on either side. We're on move 15. So I suggest to my students, get castled in the first 10 moves. Not castling is bad, okay? There's no such thing as castling early, and not castling at all is just bad. I don't want to see students not castling. So if you don't castle, bad. If you see your opponent not castling, you have an advantage. You just have to find it, okay? So with that said, let's return to what's actually going on in this actual position. White just attacked the bishop. Now, you know, my instinct is to grab the pawn, attacking the rook and the queen at the same time. Both queens would be under attack. A lot of chaos would ensue, but black simply retreated, which is totally fine. Knight takes bishop is interesting, yes. Pawn captures, but the rook is discovering in a defensive measure to protect the knight. Everything's fine. And there would be no third way for white to attack this knight. So this is a good position for black. So let's see what happens. He does do this. I would have captured with the H pawn, by the way, for the record. Capturing towards the center. Remember, the person who controls the center controls the direction of attack. So this pawn capture is actually capturing away from the center. I'm not excited about that. And I'm also not excited because it exposes the fact that the queen and the king are on the same color. So in some kind of fantasy, if the pawn was to push, bishop rotates back around this way, you might have some kind of pin situation in some fantasy way. But again, since we're talking about planning, you know, this is the first thing that you should be aware of is there's a potential play in there. The queen and the king are on the same color. You're not going to win this knight. So white could theoretically start moving his bishop around the board in disguise, a disguised bishop route, if you will. And black would probably miss the fact that white's going to try to put his bishop on this diagonal. He's just thinking, oh, you know, he realizes he can't get my knight anymore, so he's just moving his bishop somewhere else. That will be one of those disguised attacks. But anyway, we continue. White finally castles on move 17. It's probably too late. Black decides to get a knight out. I'm not so sure why he chose that square, but whatever. It's not terrible. Knight C6 feels more natural. I guess he might want to put his knight over here, but that's easily kicked. I don't necessarily like this knight d7 idea. I don't like it. I just would have put my knight on c6, but whatever. So the pawn prevents the knight from building and connecting up. He decides to lift his rooks because he's really concerned about losing his knight here. He could have just moved his queen out of the way, especially in this position. If he was so concerned about losing his knight, he could just move his queen. Just move his queen out of the pin, and then he could move his knight. You're not worried about queen takes queen, is protected. So doubling this rook, probably not the right plan. And if you're going to double the rook, why not double the rook to the 6 so that you can rotate, you know, the rook towards some attacking ideas on the king. The object of the game is to attack the king, not to attack these minor pieces. But he's very concerned about losing his knight, so he just lifts his rook up one time. He wants to bring some more help, and the bishop retreats. The other rook doubles up, so now the queen could actually leave. He protects the bishop because he knows he wants to, you know, attack this piece, and he's anticipating the knight's going to move. The knight comes to b6, which is an odd square, probably coming here. Pawn push finally. I don't like this move. Just trying to see what is the most dangerous option in the position. Knight takes pawn is probably legit. Knight takes pawn is probably legit. Let's see what he did. He retreated. Okay, so I don't see any reason why knight takes pawn is the problem here. Obviously, if bishop takes, queen takes, and that's with check, nothing to see, everything is fine. And if he pushes the pawn attacking the knight just comes back and everything's fine. So grabbing the material again is probably the right move in that position. It didn't happen. He retreated. I'm not a fan of retreating. Try to avoid going backwards at all costs. All right, so we continue. He now pushes the pawn. Let's see if the knight returns or the queen moves. The queen does move because the pawn is protected by the knight. There's no opportunity to grab anything. And this is a serious threat on the king. So let's see, what does he do? He tries to run right away. This knight check is going to be a problem. Let's see, or this knight check, either one. He chooses the correct knight in my estimation. King is retreating. Rook takes bishop is going to be death because it's a fork between the queen and the bishop. And this is one of the problems with king safety as being exposed here. Rook takes bishop was correctly played. The queen is going bye-bye. And the game ended right here. So in summary, we had the opportunity to check and see. We had the opportunity to check and see a lot of ideas with, getting the king safe, putting pressure on the center. In fact, the entire game was centered around pressuring those 4 center squares. So it was an excellent game to review from that aspect. Paying attention to when you can grab material and when your pieces don't have optimal squares, as opposed to, a piece not being threatened or having, long prospects of attacking. So there was some wasted moves in there where he moved his bishop around back and forth for a little bit, but he eventually realized that he needed to capture something, and he did capture it. Not necessarily at the right time, but he eventually found it. So from a planning point of view, you need to start seeing these things as soon as they present themselves. One of the things that I encourage my students to do is try to spend as much time looking at the possibilities in the position as possible. Don't worry about the time. Time is not relevant. All of the time that you spend calculating in the position will pay off long term, because it's less time you will have to think when the position reoccurs. So spend your time looking at these positions early. That way, 5, 6, 7, 8 games down the road, you'll recognize the position and recognize the ideas behind the position, and you'll be able to move faster. Okay, and that's Coach Frank. Make sure you check us out on twitch.tv/chesscoachnet. We're also on YouTube, Chess Coach Net. Follow me on Twitter at Real Chess Coach, Instagram, Chess Coach, and definitely join our Discord. We are accepting new students. Visit our website, chess-coach.net, chess-coach.net, and we'll see you soon.